Sid is going to talk about his journey in the US. He's been here for a while, from F1 to H1B, and I understand that you're now on your journey to the US green card. So,
Right.
how about you, if you could give us a brief introduction about yourself and we can get this started?
Right. Thank you. Hey, everybody. My name is Sid Saraswati. I've been in and around the East Coast for about 14 years. So I came to this country as an aspiring founder 15 years ago. So I got enrolled in a master's degree at upstate New York, RIT. And, I've been through this F1, CPT, OPT, multiple H1, EB2, even now going through EB1 to the green card and to the point of founding my own company journey, which I would love to share with you. So yeah, pretty excited to talk about it. And I look forward for a lot of questions and I would love to make it interactive. So in chat, if you want to keep pumping a question, I think we'll get the most out of this.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So today's session, we will mainly, and for those of you raising your hands, we won't be doing it with a call style because we are expecting a lot of attendees. So how about this? You can go ahead and send your questions, individual question to the Q&A section. Actually, our colleague Yuji here is going to collect your questions and put it into a sheet, and then we can answer one by one to those questions. So I'm going to give everybody a general background of today's sessions. So Sid is going to talk about his journey from F1, then to H1B and green card, and what are the steps that he went through, even with some of the tax layoffs, and what are the strategies he might be recommending people to do. And then we're also going to talk about tips for starting your own businesses, because this is what he done and what he has been successful doing, and then also sponsoring her own H1B visa. So we're going to talk about that. And then finally, for a lot of aspiring software engineers, we want to talk a little bit about the job perspective and immigration perspective to see if you do have any advice for them. And Sid, you can proceed.
Awesome. So I'm going to share my screen. All right. So I just want to quickly walk through my introduction, my profile, and why am I here and why I'm talking about this. So I'm Sid Saraswati. Like I said, my path in this country has been, you could say, quite not unusual, right? I came here to get a master's degree in computer science from RIT around 2000. I graduated, and after that, I did a series of startups, starting with a gaming engine development at Vivox in Boston, Cogito, again, Boston, spent 5 years there building emotional AI and advanced technologies for speech recognition and sentiment analysis. I moved from being an individual contributor, typical software engineering path, to being a manager. Now, I'm mentioning that because, if you are on an H1B or a specialized visa, there is actually a different filing you have to do if you change your path from being an IC to being a manager. And I'll talk about in my timeline what I had to do. And there's a time where I had to refile my EB2 because I switched to being a manager. So I moved into management, a very straightforward ladder from management to director to managing teams to managing managers to then eventually really taking the leap and starting my own company about 2 years ago. And then this year, got full time into my own business. We got the revenue and the ability to afford the salary I need and have a team. And so far, so good. And in the process, early this year, I wrote an article about sponsoring my own H1B visa, which got a lot of attention, about 120,000 views and a lot of comments. And more than that, a series of DMs. And I started a WhatsApp group based on the similar questions I was getting. So if you're able to find this article, you'll find a link to the WhatsApp group as well if you want to join in there. This gave me an understanding that how much of this information is absent in online forum, like what you're allowed to do on a visa. Can you be a founder on an employment visa and whatnot? So I have a website, h1bfounders.com, which I'm developing. And the idea here is that we will have a community-based wiki based on people's experiences who have spent a lot of time in this country, people who are from India and China. We know, the EB2 backlog is 100 years,
Yeah.
which is to say that, even if everything is in your favor, you're allowed to get a green card. It doesn't matter who you are, you're still going to be on a wait list because you're in the queue. It's one of the most unfortunate, I would say, part of the immigration system in the US that does not look at merit. It does not look at qualifications, but you just, same queue as anybody else for your green card. So the goal here is that, but if you are an aspiring founder, there is a way about it. You don't have to be, stuck to a job for it. And my goal is to bring a lot of people with similar stories to share their journey, how they have achieved it. And I want to go to my timeline, but I just want to show you the company that I built. Our app is called Renovate AI, and I got highly interested into the image part of artificial intelligence, the breakthroughs that happened with stable diffusion and generation of images. So we built a solution where you could take a picture of your room and get design ideas in about 5 seconds. What does my room look like if I have a Scandinavian style or modern style? How could I take an empty room and virtually stage it? Which was a very hard problem before if you had to hire a Photoshop expert or get somebody to do it for you if you're a real estate agent. But so we make it possible through AI now. And we'll be slowly building a lot of tools for painting, turning sketch into 3D renders, upscaling and transforming exteriors of buildings. So this is the business that allowed me to generate enough revenue that I could sponsor my own H1B through this company. And with that, if you have any questions so far.
Yeah, I think we do encounter some of the questions, which one of them being that people genuinely wanted to know what are the revenues or what are the minimum salaries that you need to pay to sponsor yourself within the company.
Yeah, good question. So now, as you all people are on H1B, you would know that when you as a beneficiary, right, somebody petitions your H1B, it's based on your location and title. So there's an LCA that a petitioner, like the company, files to make sure that they have to pay the minimum wage for you, right? So I'm in Boston, and in my company, I created a role for myself as a principal engineer. So I got the salary for that, and I had to meet that salary to be even have it be acceptable to be an H1B offer. Now that's an H1B rule. And then when you file for it as a company, you have to show that a business can afford this employee. So now that's a lot of case making. I guess I'm not an attorney here, but with my experience, I had to show, that I could afford 12 months of salary, like 1 year, right? I can afford an employee for 1 year and, 3 month of bank statement. If you have a funding, if you have VC backed, I think it becomes easier. My company was completely bootstrapped. I put my own money in, but then the revenue was coming in. I had an app, so we had revenue coming for Apple, and we could show that there is it's actually a legit business. And if you have potential clients in the future, if you have to show the business plan, and you can show a lot of things, a lot of case making from a law perspective to just prove that you're a legit business with a future plan. I hope that answers your question, but if there's a follow-up, let me know.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And I think before you go ahead and jump into your journey, another question that I think is very interesting is that if somebody, for example, like an OPT background, I know that maybe you haven't started your company by then, but people wanted to know if I'm on my OPT, can I also start a company or do I have to inform my DSO or what would the process be? Do you have knowledge on that as well?
I didn't do an OPT, so just take me with a grain of salt. But here's what I do know, that anybody can start a company in US, right? I have friends in India who have business in US. They're not even in the US. So being a founder is no issue. You can start an entity. The problem comes in if you start taking paychecks and you want to be employed in that company. So you have to comply to the visa rules that you're bound by. So I was an H1B, and I could start an entity and be an owner because it's like an investment, right? So if I invested in Apple stocks and I own that company in a way, that's not illegal, right? Similarly, I could buy 20% stake in my friend's business. I can be an owner. Similarly, if you're an OPT, you could put your money in, you can have an entity in which you're an owner. But to be part of that entity, to be part of the payroll, that really comes down to your visa regulation and requirements.
Absolutely, absolutely. This is what I know. Also, people come to me all the time saying that, hey, I'm on CPT or I'm on OPT. I'm going through this layoff. I'm currently under grace period. Is starting an entrepreneurship an option. And I will always say, yes, you can start start a company. And most of the time, if you're on OPT grace period, the good news is that it's easier to sponsor your own OPT with your
Yeah.
own company. So do you mind if we can go ahead and start with your journey, and then we receive additional questions, we can always go back to them.
And Ryan, tell me if this is all like visible. I can zoom in more if you want.
Yeah, maybe a little bit more. I think this is
Yeah.
better for sure. Yeah, this is good.
Yeah. So I think what I wanted to do is just show you, I'm assuming, a lot of you are on F1, OPT, and H1B. So it'll be, I would have loved to see somebody's journey when I was in your position. Like, what do people go through and what do they do? So I hope you'll find this useful. And I think a lot of what I've been through is not atypical, but there has been some interesting turns and twists. So I hope this works. So I came in to US 2010, RIT, MS in computer science. Part of my the RIT curriculum included co-ops, which was absolutely, just great to, build US experience, because when you actually go and look for full-time jobs, your co-op experience really, really helps. I was lucky to get 2 co-ops during my graduate degree part of it, which was part of my CPT. So then I moved from CPT, as I assume a lot of you are now in OPT, is to file my OPT and join a startup. Now, the interesting thing about VVox, which is my Boston-based, my first US company that I worked for, that when I joined the company, they had a little bit of a mishap, and they kind of sold the company and bought a technology inside of their own company and created a 4-person, 5-person new entity. And this was like, I had an offer letter from them, and they had all this thing going on, and I was a student. I was like, what is going on? And at some point I need an H1B
Right.
sponsored from you. Funny enough, like 2013, VWorks was a very new entity legally with like 7 people. So I became an early employee by virtue of that. And my H1B did get approved. And this was around the time I was very worried about it, because, a lot of my friends went to big companies like Amazon, Intuit, and the West Coast, big tech. And I really, really wanted to work for a startup. Like, very early signs of me was that, you don't have to have a very big company to get an H1B sponsored, right? If you have a legit business that can do something, there is no, it's not as risky as you might imagine.
Yeah, Sid, if you don't mind if I jump in just a
Of
little bit.
course.
A lot of people are deciding, when they're making that pivot in their careers, whether or not to go for a bigger tech company or to go for a startup. And I think they both have their advantages. Just tell me about your decision. Like, why did you make that decision that you wanted to go to startup?
Right. So without constraints, I wanted to work for a startup because, like I said, I was an aspiring, let's say, entrepreneur, dreamer of like, one day I'll have my own business. And I knew I would learn a lot. And plus, it was a gaming company. So this was ideal for me. But, when you see a company go down, 5 people, and you are on F1, you are in a survival mode. Right. So at that point, all your brain cells are about what's the safest thing so I can get a job in H1B. So the decision for me is that, do I take this risk, start a P, do this job that I like, and figure out whether H1B will happen or not? Or do I just go and, I did a lot of interviews during the time too. And, Intuit was one thing that was a couple of offers I had, and I could have taken that. So I think it depends on your appetite in a way and what do you really want. And this is not to say that big companies are not good. I mean, that's totally fine to work for Amazon, learn a lot from there, 6-7 years, right? You will really, get to see how big companies operate. And then you could start your own company too, if you're an aspiring founder. And big companies are good money too. So if you get a good compensation, I say go for it, right? So I guess it depends. Now, I switched from VVox to Cogito. Cogito was an MIT-based, a Media Lab company that spun out of Media Lab MIT to build health and emotional-based AI intelligence for healthcare. And one of the projects was to really do suicide prevention for veterans. So, VVox was all voice-based game engine. So I moved from a voice-based gaming industry into voice and AI, which was very interesting to me. And I guess I spent 5 years there, but the most interesting part of my immigration journey at Cogito was I moved from an IC path, from a senior software engineer, senior software engineer, principal engineer, to being an engineering manager. And during that time, this is when my H1B was transferred and I had to go file my EB. Now, why do I have to do that? So your H1B is 6 years, right? So you move to H1B, you file an H1B, you get it approved. Now, right now, you're going to have a lottery system. Back in my time, 2013, I wrote here, this was the first year that H1B had a lottery. I was part of it. So yeah, that which was, I remember around that time, it was like, what is going on and like, are they going to increase the quota? What are they going to do? And none of that has moved so far. So it's quite unfortunate that even now, if you're applying for an H1B, you have to go through a lottery. If you do have a master's degree, as I think Ryan, you might have been talking about this in your podcast and channel, that you do have a different quota for you. But either ways, you get 6 years of H1B, and then you can file for your immigration petition, which is your employment-based immigration. Now, there are three categories of that: EB1, EB2, EB3. EB2, if you have a master's degree, you do qualify for EB2. Each of these employment-based category at this point in 2024 have country-based quotas. And country-based quotas really means your country of birth. So I was born in India, and even if I had a Canadian citizenship, my quota is really going to be a quota for the Indian system because I was born in India, right? So it's based on your country of birth. And filed for that way, one thing that happened to me was because I moved from being an IC to management, I had to refile it. But that's not very important for this conversation. But I got it approved, right? So 2018, I got my EB2 approved, which allows me to just continue getting my H1B renewed perpetually until I get a green card. But the requirement is I need to have a job. So I'm very job and employment dependent at that time. I'm going to pause there. I think I'm to make sure that.
Right.
Click on
I do want to ask one more thing. Is that you mentioned that once you got the green card going, the I-140, once it's approved, you can, extend your H-1B and then do it more than 6 years. But then what if you transfer your H-1B? Have you ever did a research in that? What if you transfer? Would that also be effective? Because the I-140 was in the previous company, or once you transfer, what would that in general, what would that happen?
Correct. That's a good question, right? So at Cogito sponsored my H1B. So remember, my stay in US at this point, I am an employment-based person, right? So my whole stay is dependent on because I have a job. So when I moved from Cogito to Compass, Ryan, funny enough, I didn't have to redo my I-140. Why? Because I could do a H1B transfer from Cogito to Compass. That's obviously to do because now Compass sponsors my H1B. Now I work for Compass. I-140 is only required when my priority date becomes current and I can file for an adjustment of status to actually get a green card.
Right.
My priority date was around 2017, right? And for India, the date right now, like the people who are getting a green card on EB2 is 2012. And that thing moves like 3 months in every 3 years or something like that. Yeah.
That's great. That worked out perfectly. And we do have a couple of attendees just requesting if you can turn the volume up a little bit. I don't know if your mic is adjustable.
Yeah, is this better?
Yeah, I think it's
this is better.
better. I'm on max volume all the time, so I can hear you clearly. I assume that some people may be on their phone, so this is way better. I hope this solves everybody's concerns.
Yeah, I'm gonna speak closer to the microphone. If it's too loud, let me know too, because now I'm like.
Sure. All right, thank you.
Okay. So 2018, I-140 approved, like Ryan asked perfectly, which is, once you have I-140 is a very long process, right? So it took me about 2 years because you had to go through a perm process, you had to have a newspaper thing, put an article, say that I'm hiring for, a non-American and I can't find anybody who's American. So it's a very long process you have to go through. Once you get it approved, though, you get a priority date, and that date is yours, which is you can leave an employer, you can go to a different company, keep transferring your H1B, but once you get a priority date, which means that date allows you to file for your adjustment of status, which is your green card, as long as the quota moves to that date. So if my Indian quota, China has, I think 2015 might have a big, backlog too. But my date was fixed. So I could keep moving employer on H1B and just wait for the day till the priority date becomes 2017. Now, funny enough, I don't know how much of, I guess most of you might know or not know, but the 2017 date, even though it looks like 5 years from 2012, but the wait for green card, the joke is that it's about like 100 years of wait list for India and like China. It's pretty backlogged, and it seems like there are resolutions and discussions about it. So let's see what happens there. But so then Compass happened. So as I said here, I was on H1B visa, right? As you can see on the left, but my EB2 was approved. So I could perpetually now just transfer my H1B and live. And this is a very difficult life because you are, here in the country for 10, 15 years. You lose your job, you get 60 days of grace period to find a new job. And if you don't, they ship you. They're like, you're going to leave the country. So it's the biggest, I guess, unfortunate and a very harsh situation for a lot of people right now, which I guess people in this call understand, but I don't think half the country understands what the situation is for most people. So Compass was a real estate company in New York. It was a lot of fun. Again, it's just startups to IPO and big companies. So I've been involved with a lot of these high growth companies. Then 2021, 2023 is when I started looking at EB1 as a category. So EB2 has a quota. EB1 is for, they call it alien with extraordinary abilities. It requires you to prove about 9 out of 9. There are 9 criteria, and you got to prove that you can meet at least 3 of those criteria to qualify for this EB1 category. So I can go deep into that. I guess it'll take me a long time to talk about each category, but for the purpose of this call, I'm not sure if I qualify for it, but given a lot of support from my friends and family, and given the situation I was in, it was like, let's give it a shot. So I started building my profile for EB1 around 2022, and I've kind of have a little bit of a timeline for how long it took for me to prepare an EB1 application and get it to an approval. And a part of that whole process, you will say, is that profile development, file. I got an RFE, which is request for evidence, which is a way for USCIS to tell you that we don't believe, we need more evidence for your case. My EB1 was denied once, and I tried again. I learned a lot. There was a lot of silly mistakes I did. It was really like a lot of learning because of denial. And I corrected that. I also changed my attorneys during the process, and I really took control over this like document that you have to write. And then I got my approval in 2023 October. Now, when I got my EB1 approval, the EB1 date for green card was I could port my EB2 2017 date to EB1 because EB1 is a very narrow category and it's like much smaller pool than EB2. I qualified to file for my green card. But that whole process again is called adjustment of status, more complexity. Getting an EB1 does not mean you have a green card. Then I have to start a new process of adjusting my status, asking USCIS that, okay, my EB1 is done. Can you now give me a green card? Which took another year, which I'll talk about. And meanwhile, that was happening. I founded a company on H1B because AI was happening, and this is another time I was very desperate because you have an opportunity, you have an idea, you're waiting for a visa, you have everything's happening, you miss it by 2 months, you never know, are you going to regret for the rest of your life if you never take this chance? So I did a lot of research, and I was scared too. Can I start a company on H1B? What is possible? What is not possible? How much can I engage? So I started trial and error as an investor. I had a co-founder, and we started, this entity, thinking about it, what it could happen, and started developing it. And my goal was to get it to a point where it can start generating revenue. So I have a safety net, and I could see that this entity can afford my salary. Because once that was true, I could have this entity transferred by H1B, and I could just start working for it, right? And start taking paychecks officially. So that's what happened in 2024. I filed for H1B visa through my company. And then I moved there. I left my job and I was part of Trial and Error Inc. And then I filed for my HSM status on the parallel. And then this year, a month ago, August, I think, Ryan, this is like while I was talking to you, right? This topic,
Congratulations.
I got my green card. So after 1 year. So I'm going to pause there. I'm like, there's a lot of information here. So let's make sure we get people.
For sure. Funny, I saw your article on LinkedIn, and that is why I reached out to Sid. I think he has an amazing story to share, especially people under similar situations. They're changing companies, they're experiencing layoffs. They want to find out a way if it is possible for me to get my own H1B. So let me circle back to that point. I think a lot of people want to ask you, you mentioned that you are an investor at first of this company. And then is there any quote unquote percentages of shares that you can have maximum, or
Yeah.
what kind of titles that you possess when you do the H1B transfer to make sure that is successful?
Correct. So that is the key question. Now, why is that so important? Because the stipulation for H1B is that you have to have an employer-employee relationship with the business. That translates to you not having veto powers, which translates to somebody needs to be able to fire you. That's the crux of it, right? So number one criteria, you got to meet the salary. Your job has to be specialized based on your degree and your skill, right? The basic H1B rule. But to be part of the company that you own, right? I owned more than 50% of Trial and Error. And I had to have a more complex case because I had to also prove that somebody can still fire me. So how would I achieve that? The way you do it is that you create a board of directors. And board of directors sit on top of companies. Board of directors also don't have to have salaries. They also don't have to have equities. They have voting rights. It's a basic corporate law thing, nothing to do with immigration, right? A business has a board of directors, they have voting rights. So when I started a company, as a founder, I was part of the board. My co-founder was part of the board, and I added one more board member. And then I could prove that each one of us have equal voting rights. So it's 2 out of 1. If they both vote together to fire me out of my own company, even though I have more equity, that's totally doable. So I don't have veto powers over the ultimate decisions that the company will take on board meetings. So that proves employer-employee relationship. If you ever work with an attorney that will help you with this is not something that's like, I think what I'm talking about is not even a hack. Don't think that I'm talking about a hack here. Okay. That's like literally the legal way. This is how the board works.
And then just to repeat, this is wonderful information. Just to repeat what you said, I wanted to confirm that I wanted to make sure that everybody get this. So you mentioned that you can create a board if you wanted to do this. And then all of these board members, like any one of these board members, do they have to have some share of the company? Do they have to have working relationships, all of them to the company, or some of them doesn't have to be an owner?
Now the board, I mean, I had advisors, right? So I was on the board, my co-founder was the board. Now a couple of things I'll say. One thing I'll say is that you can put your family members, right, as board members and say like, hey, look, I have board members and they can have, there's 5 members and all that, because USCIS is looking at legit businesses. They're looking at like, are you like scamming her? Like, is this real or not? So you can have a board member that you can appoint, and it's a bylaws document that governs a company. So it's all based on your company formation documents that gives voting rights to these board members, Ryan. And that's like, at this point, it's nothing to do with immigration. It's more like, do you have a business? And in that business, Ryan or Sid, do you have a board member that controls the business, or are you the dictator? The rule of H1B is that you have to have an employer-employee relationship. So you have to prove that, like, there is a board that can oversee me, and if the business is required to survive, they can still fire me, right? So they just have people who are on top of you, but they don't have to have a salary, and board members don't have to have equity.
That's good. That's good. Wonderful information. And then we do have a couple questions coming our way. Do you want to jump right into the Q&A, Sid?
Up to you. Yeah, I think I'm done with that presentation. I think I can talk more. I'm going to stop sharing just to make sure. Yeah, just we can go to Q&A. Lead the way.
Sweet. Right. So our team has collected some of the questions and we're going right at them. And I do want to remind everybody, we do have lots of people, lots of participants. So we wanted to prioritize the more relevant questions. And then if we didn't have the time to catch up on your questions, don't worry about that. You can either go to H1B Founders if you have questions, concerns, or you wanted to join the community with Sid, or if you want to ask about another way, for example, Day One CPT, you can scan the code and talk to our consultant. So I'll go to the first question. So this person wanted to know what scale can be a newly created company, a draw, and then H1B, and then also for applying for a green card. I think he wanted to know like how big of this startup company needs to be in terms of foundations.
I mean, like big in terms of, I assume you mean revenue, or I mean, big doesn't have to be employees. Like, for example, I was the first employee of my own company. So it doesn't have to have 100 people in it, right? So what is the USCIS looking for is like meeting the requirements. They're just very law and case making. It's very logical if you think about it. Law says you need to afford the salary of the H1B beneficiary. So are you big enough to hire this person for X role, right? Which is, you might be in tech, you might be somewhere else. So depending on the role you have, depending on the location you have, what is the minimum salary you have? So are you big enough for that? And then you're gonna have some like a business plan and revenue. You gotta have a business that's doing something.
Yeah, for sure. I think one thing you mentioned that is very important is that H1B visa, the requirement actually varies, of course, to locations, job duties, and stuff like that. So, for example, if you are getting the H1B under this salary in New York, it's a different salary range in Los Angeles. So you do have to pay attention to that, especially that you are starting a company for yourself. So let's go to question number 2. I think this person might have asked before Sid shared his journey. So we kind of covered this already. If you missed this part, if you come in late, don't worry, we'll send you the email, we'll send you the recordings, and you can also contact Sid and you can have conversations with us. And I think we'll skip this one and we'll go to number 3. Any legal services that you personally recommend and how do you find them? I think let's answer this in a more general manner. I don't want to drop any names, but then I think a tip in terms of how to find the right people, how to find the right attorney will be very, very helpful.
Yeah, look, go to h1bfounders.com or join the WhatsApp group. We have people like, it's like a peer reviewed. Think of it as like Amazon, like you're buying something, reviews matter. We don't have a centralized system where you can have reviews for attorneys. So how do you find them? Look, one thing I'll say is that get more than one opinion, right, for your case. So, think of that as finding a doctor or hiring somebody. Not everybody is fully aware of every situation. So attorneys work on a lot of different situations. Sometimes they can give you a very generic answer for your situation. So you don't want to assume that you get one answer this way and you just get disappointed, there's no way out. Do seek out a lot of opinions, and then you'll find out the variations, and they can dive into like, oh, why is that different? Maybe somebody knows something else. So you got to hire an attorney rather than thinking that, oh, you just pay money and that they'll do a favor for you, right?
And I think question number 4 will kind of cover that as well. So this person wanted to know more about which visa were you on before you sponsor your own visa. I think the answer was H1B. You was transferring from another company to your own company.
Correct.
And then also, how did you create it, your venue? We also shared that in your journey. So feel free to go back to that recording and rewatch it. I know Sid shared a lot of his insight and also details within that short presentations. So you can definitely go back and watch. And then question number 5, did you register the company under your name or a US citizen? And then what are the considerations you have when you're starting a business on an H1B? I think you talked about this, but I think this is pretty important. Maybe we can kind of go back to that a little bit.
Yeah, so I had a co-founder, and my co-founder is in Canada. And so he's not a US citizen. I'm not a US citizen. So when you start a company, there are many ways to do it. So, I mean, you're going to have a bunch of questions like, is it an LLC? Is it a Delaware C Corp? Is it, whatnot? And it's a little beyond immigration, by the way. It depends on what business you have. Are you going to raise funding? A lot of time when I'm going to talk about like straight, like tech, VC style startup, which is Delaware C Corp. And they like it for the laws in Delaware and funding reasons and all that. When I started my business, when I like funded a business, I thought I will raise money from VCs. So Delaware C Corp was like very easy for me to think about. So I was part of that team and I started the company there with my co-founder. $100 Stripe Atlas or $200 a different service. We get a company in like 3 days.
It's good to know. Yeah, let's jump on to question 6. By the way, Sid, I think we originally scheduled for 45
Yeah.
minutes. I'm wondering, are you open to
We can take a few more questions. Yeah, of course.
Sure. Thank you. We do appreciate, everybody does appreciate you coming on and sharing all this. Everything's been good. I wouldn't talk too much. I'll keep with the questions. If I open the company that is not under my major of areas, which wasn't what I studied, I apply for my H1B or green card. This is a very good question.
Yeah.
Or somebody without a software engineer background, can he do a startup in tech and AI?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a different rule for a company and the one for H1B. You can start any company you want, right? Like, who stops you? Nobody is qualifying you for a business. Your qualification of business is, right? It has to have a legal thing, proper address, and all that stuff, or whatever business needs. Now, the H1B requirement is a role in the company, right? So let's say I start, I don't know, like pick a retail shop, and my specialization is I need an IT person because I also do e-commerce, right? And e-commerce requires IT. So you could have a role that requires website development and that requires an IT person that you can hire in a shop that's nothing to do with tech. So H1B role is a requirement for what you need from that employee. Company can be anything you want. And most companies are tech companies at this point. So you could think about like what could create a role for you.
For sure. And then next questions, I'm gonna answer this in short. Can a person start a company when they're on H4? I think the answer is yes. We discussed this before. There isn't any restrictions regarding foreigners starting a company in the US. It's pretty open. And then next questions, we'll be talking about your EB1 stories and what criteria did you fulfill. I think you kind of went through about this a little bit. I know this can be very complicated. So for timing's sake, I think we can skip this question for now. If we do have opportunities to invite you back again, if you do want to come in again, we definitely wanted to talk more about EB1s, EB2s.
Yeah, it's a big topic, and if I touch, that'll take 10 minutes just to go through each criteria and how I did it. But the WhatsApp group I have and h1bfounders.com, it does come up time to time because for India and China, people on EB2, we know that the scope is hopeless. So a lot of people who have a profile and who can develop it are looking for EB1. So do join that, and I think you will find some useful information.
Yeah, good point. How do people join the WhatsApp group? Is this through h1bfounders.com?
I just started that website, and it's just like it says, if you go to the website, it says coming soon, enter your email. And I'm going to put a link there. So I have a unique link. The reason I don't promote it much because funny enough, believe it or not, I get a lot of people spamming it as soon as I make it public. But if you go to my LinkedIn and if just make sure that you can actually work for it. So if you go and find my LinkedIn post on how I sponsored my H1B visa, I have a comment. And also in my post there's a link. If you click on that link, it will auto enroll you into that WhatsApp group.
Sounds good. Sounds good. If you search this full name, which is also Zoom, you should be able to find him on LinkedIn. All right, we'll go to the next one. I'm not able to prove that my company has enough money to sponsor H1B. However, if I don't work for that company, how can my company make money? I don't know if this question makes sense to you.
It kind of does, but I think the question is that I start a company myself and it's a chicken and egg problem, which is if I start a company myself and if I don't do any work, how is the company going to make any money? But if it's not going to make any money, how can I ever work for it?
Right.
So, well, look, if you start a US business, you could hire a CEO. You're an investor, right? So hire somebody wherever. It doesn't have to be in US. So if I start a restaurant tomorrow on H1B, I could hire a bunch of employees there to work for the restaurant. And I can still be the owner. And at some point, I can decide to work for it. Nobody's stopping you from hiring a CEO for a company, right?
I think for sure. I think one of your point which was very important during your presentation, was that your company doesn't necessarily have to make money in day one.
Yeah.
You could invest some money into the business, not necessarily a lot of money, but you have to invest a little bit of money. And then once it generates the income, is then when you transfer to that company, or is then when you apply to H1B.
Yeah, let me touch one quick thing. I just was reminded of that. The H1B is not the only way. I wrote that in my article too. The other way is the O1 visa. And I think we have much time left today, but the key thing about O1 to understand, O1 is a little bit harder to prove. Like you have to, it's the same as EB1, you have 9 criteria. You have to say that you're a specialized person that's fit for the role. It's a little bit more paperwork, but it's doable. Now, the benefit of O1 visa is that it doesn't have a minimum salary requirement. Okay. So a lot of founders, if you go to Bay Area, YC based founders who come from India and China, they file one from India and China for their businesses and they come into this country on an O1. So they directly come in. I didn't do it because one doesn't have a very good dependent visa. H1B comes with H, that's number one, and I wanted that. And number two, I also had my EB1, so I didn't want to, like, I had no reason to do O1 because my H1B transfer would have just happened, right? But you can look at that if you want to.
For sure, yeah. If we have time in the future, we definitely wanted to go back to these questions. I think O1 is one of the most interesting things that people wanted to get into. Next question. So can you work on your own? I mean, we answered this. Can one with an MBA start a business and not just a tech, start a science, including any kinds of companies? We mentioned this. Yes, as Sim mentioned, is the H1B role, is the job role that is important. It's not what this company does that affects your H1B eligibility.
Correct.
Okay, so what happens when I redo my I-140 and it's rejected? Will my O1 I-140 still hold true and it can be used?
That's it. I don't know. Well, I mean, it'll be interesting if your I-140 got rejected, but I think your priority date will stay the way it was. So you will retry the I-140 again because your priority date is what matters. So if it gets rejected, maybe there's an application error. I don't think they will say that now you had this 2014 date locked for you and now it's move up. So that will, I think will stay intact, but I think this is beyond the scope of my understanding and knowledge.
Yeah, for sure. And just to remind everybody again, today's for education and experience sharing only. So we're not sharing any legal advice of any sort. So if you are seeking legal advice, go consult with the immigration attorney. They're the best at. And then EB1s, we will go back to this in the future, but maybe not today. And then next questions, are you doing all of this by yourself or do you always have an immigration attorney to help you?
Good question. Look, the reason I wrote the article I wrote was because I was like in pretty much perpetual darkness for like 2 years to figure all these things out, right? And I've been in this country for 14, 15 years. Now, what happens when you go online and Google, as an H1B, can I start a company? You get a lot of misleading and confusing information. I mean, the first 2 forums you'll click on will say that, oh no, you'll get deported tomorrow, right? Because they don't understand the question. It's not like you're working for a company, right? Getting a payroll illegally from an entity that doesn't sponsor H1B is obviously illegal. But to start an entity, so it's very, very nuanced. So yeah, I had to figure all of these things out. That's why I wrote it. And immigration lawyers, I think, only thing I'll say is that it depends on you getting the good one. It's no different than you finding a good doctor, right? Like it's like some doctors are really good, but some can screw you up too. So you gotta really get a couple of opinions there, and it's costly too. So I think what Ryan and the group is doing with you guys here, providing information, is these are the kind of channels, and you are here, right? You're seeking information. So what you're doing right now, this question is exactly what I did. Like going to find people and connect the dots and look at, I'm sharing my information here, right? There are a lot of people giving back to the community. So find those people, talk to people who have been through the experiences. That'll be more helpful.
Yeah, Sid, I remember during our conversation, you mentioned that you wanted to go ahead and start some kind of a channel, maybe YouTube, maybe podcast, whatever. And we will be very happy to see if you go ahead and share your own stories.
Yeah.
And then once you do, I'm going to go ahead and let everybody know so that we can keep the good content coming. And then next question. So OPT, stand OPT, is it more strict rules regarding to salary, states, and working titles? I think I can go ahead and answer this one. In terms of more strict, you got to see what kind of things that you're comparing to. So if you're comparing to the first year OPT, Yes, because the first year OPT, you doesn't necessarily have to have salaries. You can do volunteers. But then for stand OPT, you definitely have to be working for a e-verify company, which e-verification is another thing for a company. A lot of US companies doesn't actually have e-verifications. And then salaries, yes, you do have to make salaries, but then there isn't necessarily any other restrictions when it comes to state and job duties. You have to be, the bottom line, you have to be related to your majors that you studied, where you got those OPTs from. I think this is what I would say for stand OPT, and then move on. What are the requirements for board members? I think we talked about this. People wanted to know more. So do they have to have more than 50% share? I think the answer from you is no, right?
No.
Okay,
They don't.
sounds good. All right, so another questions regarding I-140. All right, I think was it this question that I asked you if I-140 approved is pending? Can we still do H1 transfer, or is this not advisable?
Well, if it's pending, that's a different question. I mean, if it's approved, you can move on. But if it's pending, I think, yeah, I mean, if you've started the process from an employer who's saying that they're going to hire you, I mean, you got to I think you got to get it done, get through the process, right? And I think they also say that you got to stay 6 months after the approval. Back in my time, they used to say about 1 year. I think there was a rule. I remember they say that the employer can also withdraw if they are like upset with you. You left them after they are, so they say stay for 6 months. So then the law say they can't withdraw it. But look at it again, and I think Ryan, maybe you guys know better about this than I do.
And our advice would be still do more research, as Sid mentioned, and then if you do want immigration attorney assistance, you can go ahead and consult with them. I think that would be the better way. And then next one, I think this one is pretty good question. So can there be only one board members if they wanted to go your route?
Yeah, I mean, look, for my case, when I started my company through Stripe, by default, I was a board member, right? Because as an investor and owner, so my co-founder was a board member, so it was two of us. So technically speaking, I added one board member, right? Extra, if you think about it.
Right. So as long as the person can prove that the other board member have a decision, have a call of whether or not they can terminate your relationship with the company, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I think we went over time a little bit. Let's do just one more and then we can wrap up for today. So can you start us that up on CPT OPT? Yes. The answer is yes. We kind of answered this. So if you missed this part, feel free to go back to the recording. And then as I learned that you can start a company but not operate it on F1 visa. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, what do you mean by operate, right? So yeah, I mean on F1, I don't know. I mean, I actually don't know. It's been 15 years for F1 visa for me, but you're a student visa, right? So I don't know what the
Right.
rules.
F1 is a student visa. I guess the question is, if you start this company, but you're not working for that company, is this possible? I think there's no restrictions restricting you from that. You can still invest in a company as it is. But then if you wanted to go to the H1B sponsorship route, maybe there's more specific you need to pay closer attention to.
Yeah, I mean, at some point you're gonna move out of that F1 visa, right? Because it's a student visa tied to your university. So you can start a company. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot. You can start a company, but not operate it on F1 visa. Yeah, okay. Maybe I'm not understanding the question properly, but yeah, I guess you can start a company.
Yeah, for sure. I think we still have just a couple more. I think this is it for today for everybody joining in. We went over time for a couple 10, 13 minutes. So I want to give my special thank you for Sid for sticking around with everybody and answering people's questions. If you have follow-up questions, additional questions regarding the topics that we covered, feel free to go to his website, h1bfounders.com, or find him on LinkedIn so that you guys could have further communications. Sid, thank you so much for today, and hopefully we can see you soon in the future.
My pleasure. Yeah, kudos to all of you. And for everybody on this call, you guys doing yourself a great favor of seeking this information. And you're all aspiring, this is what the American dream is. We'll make the way forward.
Well put. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Sid. And we'll see you next time. Thank you. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.